The cards hit the table with a sound that would haunt Teresa O'Malley for the rest of her life. Each slap of worn paper against scarred wood measuring out her future in increments of ink and pulp. She stood frozen in the doorway of the Silver Spur Saloon in Wilson, Kansas, watching her father's trembling hands reach for his whiskey glass instead of the pile of chips that had dwindled to nothing over the course of 3 brutal hours on this sweltering August night in 1882. "I don't have the money," Patrick O'Malley said, his Irish brogue thick with drink and desperation. "But I've got something worth more than $500. Teresa's heart stopped. She knew before he said it, before his bloodshot eyes found her across the smoky room, before the stranger with the winning hand turned in his chair to look at what was being offered. She had seen her father sink this low before, but never quite to the bottom of the barrel where a man's soul turned black and hollow. "My daughter," Patrick said. 20 years old, healthy, can cook and clean and so. She's worth $1,000 easy." The saloon went quiet except for the tinny piano in the corner that kept playing because the musician was too drunk to notice the shift in the air. Teresa felt every eye in the room turn toward her, assessing her value like she was a horse at auction. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms hard enough to draw blood. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything except stand there while her father bartered away her life to settle a gambling debt. The stranger at the table was younger than she expected, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a dusty black hat pushed back on his head and a leather vest over a shirt that had once been white. His gun belt sat low on his hips, well worn and comfortable. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then looked back at her father with something like disgust crossing his features. "You want to bet your daughter," the stranger said. It was not a question. His voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "It's a good offer," Patrick said, desperation making him bold. "She'll work hard, do whatever you need, worth way more than $500. Teresa finally found her voice. "Papa, no." He would not look at her. Coward that he was, Patrick O'Malley kept his gaze fixed on the table, on the cards, on anything except the daughter he was trying to sell to a stranger in a Kansas saloon. Teresa had known her father was weak, had watched him drink away her mother's memory and every dollar they had scraped together, but this was beyond weakness. This was evil dressed up in desperation's clothing. The stranger leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming once against the table. "I don't make a habit of winning human beings in card games." "Then you'll forfeit." Patrick's voice lifted with hope. "We'll call it even." "I did not say that." The stranger's eyes were cold now, flat as a snake's. "I said I do not make a habit of it." "That does not mean I'm going to let you walk away from a debt you cannot pay." He gathered the cards with quick, efficient movements and began to shuffle. The sound was loud in the quiet room, each riffle and bridge of the deck like a heartbeat. Teresa watched his hands move, watched the cards dance between his fingers, and realized with a sick feeling that he was too good at this. Her father had been hustled, played by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "One more hand," the stranger said. "Same stakes. You win, we're even, and you walk out of here. I win, I'm taking what you offered." Patrick's hands shook as he reached for the cards. Teresa wanted to run across the room and slap them out of his hands, wanted to drag him out of the saloon and onto the street, wanted to do anything except watch this nightmare play out. But her feet were rooted to the floor, her body frozen by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. The hand played out in minutes that felt like hours. Teresa did not understand card games, could not follow the strategy or the odds, but she understood the look on her father's face as he laid down his cards. Defeat. resignation, relief that it was over even though he had lost. The stranger showed his hand without ceremony. 4 queens stared up from the table like judgment itself. "No," Teresa whispered. "No, this cannot be happening." The stranger stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He was tall, she realized, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent more time in the saddle than out of it. He collected his winnings, counting out the bills and coins with careful precision, then walked across the room toward her. Each step brought him closer, and Teresa felt her throat tighten with fear and fury in equal measure. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the gray in his eyes was not flat after all but flecked with silver, like a storm breaking over prairie grass. Close enough that she could smell leather and horse and something clean underneath, like soap or river water. "What's your name?" he asked. "Teresa." Her voice came out steady despite everything. "Teresa O'Malley," he nodded once. "My name is Vincent Bartlett. I own a ranch about 15 miles west of here, near the Saline River. I run cattle and horses, and I've got 5 men working for me." Teresa waited for the rest, for the demands, for whatever horrors a man who would win a woman in a card game might have planned. But Vincent Bartlett just stood there, his hat in his hands now, looking at her with an expression she could not read. "You are free to go or stay," he said finally. "Your father lost you in a card game, that's true enough, but I'm not in the business of owning people. You can walk out that door right now and I'll not stop you. Or you can come work for me, earn wages same as any of my ranch hands and have a place to sleep and food to eat. Your choice." The words hit her like a bucket of cold water. Teresa stared at him, trying to find the trick, the catch, the lie hidden in what seemed like a genuine offer. Men did not win women in card games and then offer them freedom. Men did not look at a transaction like what her father had done and try to make it right. "You are serious," she said slowly, "completely." Vincent put his hat back on, tugging the brim low. "I meant what I said. I don't own people and I'm not looking to start. But your father owes a debt, and if you're willing, you can work it off fair and square. After that, you're free to do whatever you want." Teresa looked past him to where her father sat at the table, his head in his hands. She felt nothing for him in that moment, no love or pity or even anger, just a vast emptiness where her family used to be. Her mother had died of fever 3 years ago, and her father had been dying by inches ever since, drowning himself in whiskey and self-pity. She had tried to save him, had worked her fingers raw taking in sewing and washing, had begged him to stop gambling, to stop drinking, to be the father she remembered from childhood. He had chosen cards and whiskey instead. And now he had chosen to gamble her away like she was nothing more than property. "I will come with you," Teresa said, turning back to Vincent. "I will work for you and pay off his debt, but after that, I never want to see Patrick O'Malley again." Something flickered in Vincent's expression, there and gone too quick to identify. "Fair enough. You have things to collect, at the boarding house 2 streets over, my clothes and my mother's sewing kit. I'll wait for you outside, take your time." He walked past her and out into the night, leaving Teresa alone with a saloon full of strangers and a father who could not meet her eyes. She stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle into her bones. Everything had changed in the span of a single card game. Her life as she knew it was over. Patrick finally looked up at her. "Teresa, I do not," she said, her voice like iron. "Do not say a word to me. You made your choice. Now live with it." She walked out of the Silver Spur Saloon and did not look back. The boarding house was dark except for a lamp in the window of Mrs. Henderson's room. Teresa climbed the stairs to the small room she had rented for the past 2 years, since her father had sold their house to pay off another debt. Everything she owned fit into one carpet bag: 3 dresses, 2 shifts, a spare pair of boots, her mother's sewing kit with its precious needles and thread, and the silver locket her parents had given her on her 16th birthday. It was not much to show for 20 years of living, but it was hers. She left the rent money on the dresser with a note for Mrs. Henderson, then carried her bag down the stairs and out into the warm night. Vincent was waiting by a hitching post, his horse, a big bay gelding with a white star on its forehead. He took her bag and tied it behind his saddle without comment. "It is a long ride," he said. "We can wait until morning if you prefer." Teresa shook her head. "I want to leave now. There is nothing for me here." Vincent nodded and mounted his horse in one fluid motion. Then he held out his hand to her. "Put your foot on mine and I'll pull you up." She had ridden horses before, though never behind a man on his saddle. Teresa took his hand, warm and calloused and strong, and let him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under their combined weight, but did not protest. She had no choice but to put her arms around Vincent's waist to keep from falling, and she tried not to think about how strange it was to be this close to a man she had just met, a man who technically owned her debt, even if he said she was free. They rode out of Wilson as the church bells struck midnight. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by darkness and distance, and Teresa felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for years. She was leaving behind the father who had betrayed her, the boarding house with its thin walls and thinner meals, the endless cycle of sewing and washing and scraping by. Whatever waited for her at Vincent Bartlett's ranch, it could not be worse than what she was leaving behind. The ride took nearly 2 hours at an easy pace. Vincent did not try to talk to her, and Teresa was grateful for the silence. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what came next. The prairie stretched out around them, endless grass silvered by moonlight, and overhead the stars blazed in patterns she had known since childhood. The Big Dipper, Orion's belt, the North Star that pointed the way home, except she did not have a home anymore. The ranch appeared gradually out of the darkness, announced first by the lowing of cattle in distant pens, and then by the square bulk of buildings against the horizon. Vincent guided his horse through a gate and up a dirt track to a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch. Off to the left were a barn, a bunkhouse, and several other structures Teresa could not identify in the dark. Vincent dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. "The house has 4 bedrooms," he said. "You can take the one at the end of the hall. It's got a good bed and a window that catches the morning sun. Washroom is off the kitchen." Teresa stood in the yard, clutching her carpet bag, trying to make sense of this. "You are giving me a room in your house. The bunkhouse is full of ranch hands, and I figure you would rather have privacy." Vincent unsaddled his horse with practiced efficiency. "There's a lock on the door if that makes you feel better. I won't bother you." "Why are you doing this?" the question burst out of her. "Why did you offer me a choice? You could have." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Vincent looked at her over his horse's back. "Could have what? Forced you to work for me. Treated you like property." "That's not who I am, Teresa. I played your father in cards because he had been cheating other men all night and someone needed to teach him a lesson. I did not expect him to bet his daughter. When he did, I figured the least I could do was give you a way out of a bad situation." "So this is charity. This is a job," Vincent corrected. "I need someone to help with the house and the cooking. My ranch hands are good men, but they cannot cook worth a damn, and I've been living on beans and jerky for too long. You work, you get paid, and when your father's debt is settled, you're free to go or stay as you see fit. That's the deal." Teresa studied him in the moonlight, this stranger who had turned her life upside down and somehow made it feel like he was setting it right again. Vincent Bartlett had a good face, she decided. Strong and honest, with lines around his eyes that said he smiled more than he frowned. He had not leered at her in the saloon, had not made demands or threats, had given her a choice when he could have taken everything. "What was my father's debt?" she asked. "How much do I need to work off?" $500. At $2 a week, that's about 5 years' worth of work. Vincent led his horse toward the barn. "But we can talk about that in the morning. For now, let's get you settled. 5 years." The number sat heavy in her chest. 5 years of her life to pay for her father's stupidity. But as Teresa followed Vincent into the ranch house, she realized it could have been so much worse. At least she would be working honestly for wages. At least she had been given a choice. The house was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade wooden furniture and curtains that needed mending. Vincent showed her to the bedroom at the end of the hall, a simple room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. He lit the lamp on the bedside table and stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands again. "There's water in the pitcher and clean linens in the dresser," he said. "If you need anything, my room is at the other end of the hall. Otherwise, I'll see you in the morning." "Vincent." She stopped him before he could leave. "Thank you for giving me a choice, for not." She gestured helplessly, unable to find the words. He nodded once. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He closed the door behind him, and Teresa heard his footsteps recede down the hall. She sat on the edge of the bed, her carpet bag still clutched in her hands, and finally let herself feel everything she had been holding back. Anger at her father, fear of what came next, relief that she had escaped something terrible. And underneath it all, a strange flicker of something that might have been hope. She changed into her night shift and crawled into bed, expecting to lie awake for hours. But exhaustion pulled her under almost immediately, and she slept dreamlessly until the sun broke over the horizon and filled her new room with light. The smell of coffee woke her fully. Teresa dressed quickly in her oldest dress, braided her hair, and followed her nose to the kitchen. Vincent was already up, dressed in work clothes and standing by the stove with a coffee pot. He looked up when she entered and gestured to the pot. "Coffee's fresh. Cups are in the cabinet." Teresa poured herself a cup and took a cautious sip. It was strong enough to strip paint but hot and bracing. "What time is it?" "About 6. The men will be coming up from the bunkhouse for breakfast soon." Vincent leaned against the counter, his own cup in hand. "I usually make biscuits and bacon, maybe some eggs if the chickens are laying well." "Think you can handle that?" "I have been cooking since I was 10 years old," Teresa said with more confidence than she felt. "I can manage breakfast. Good. Flour's in the bin, bacon's in the cold room out back, and the chicken coop is behind the barn. Take whatever you need." He left her to it, heading outside to start his day's work. Teresa stood in the kitchen for a moment, orienting herself, then rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The biscuits came together easily, her hands remembering the motions her mother had taught her years ago. She found a pan for the bacon and another for eggs. And by the time the ranch hands started filtering in through the back door, she had breakfast laid out on the long wooden table. There were 5 of them, ranging in age from a kid who could not be more than 18 to a grizzled old man with a beard down to his chest. They stopped short when they saw her, surprise and curiosity written plain on their faces. Vincent came in behind them and made introductions. "This is Teresa O'Malley. She'll be helping around the house and cooking meals. Treat her with respect or you will answer to me." The men nodded, murmuring greetings, and took their seats. Teresa stood by the stove, uncertain, until Vincent pulled out a chair at the table. "You eat too." "You are not a servant." She sat, acutely aware of being the only woman in a room full of men, but they were focused on the food and not on her. The old man with the beard, who Vincent introduced as Samuel, complimented her biscuits. The young kid, whose name was James, ate 4 helpings of eggs. By the time breakfast was finished, Teresa felt like maybe this could work. Maybe she could make a place for herself here, at least for the 5 years it would take to pay off her father's debt. The days fell into a rhythm. Teresa cooked 3 meals a day for the ranch hands, cleaned the house, mended clothes, and tended the kitchen garden she found behind the house. The work was hard but honest, and she fell into bed each night too tired to think about anything except sleep. Vincent treated her exactly as he had promised, with respect and distance. He paid her $2 every Saturday, counting out the coins into her hand, and she tucked them away in her mother's sewing kit, watching her debt shrink by increments. The ranch hands were good men, just as Vincent had said. Samuel taught her how to milk the cow and churn butter. James brought her wildflowers from the prairie, bashful and sweet. The others, whose names were Robert, Thomas, and Henry, treated her like a little sister, teasing her gently and helping her with the heavier chores. It was more family than she had known in years, but it was Vincent who occupied her thoughts more and more as the weeks passed. She watched him work with the horses, his hands gentle and patient as he broke the wild ones to saddle. She listened to him talk with his men, making decisions with a quiet authority that never tipped into cruelty. She noticed the way he always served himself last at meals, making sure everyone else had enough first. He was a good man, she realized, truly good in a way that was rare in her experience, and he was handsome, though she tried not to think about that. It felt dangerous to notice the way his shoulders filled out his shirts, or the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the rare times she caught him watching her with an expression she could not decipher. He had given her freedom, had treated her with respect, had never once made her feel like anything other than an employee. She had no right to want more than that. September turned to October, the heat breaking into crisp autumn days that smelled of turning leaves and coming cold. Teresa had been at the ranch for 2 months, and life had settled into something almost comfortable. She was learning to ride, with Vincent as her patient teacher, and she had started to believe that maybe when her 5 years were up, she might choose to stay. Everything changed on a cold morning in late October when a rider came up the road at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. Teresa was in the kitchen starting lunch when she heard the commotion outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, watching as Vincent and Samuel ran out to meet the rider. The man was talking fast, gesturing wildly, and Teresa saw Vincent's face go hard and tight. He said something to Samuel, who ran toward the barn, then turned and strode toward the house. Teresa met him at the door. "What is wrong?" "Cattle rustlers hit the McPherson ranch last night," Vincent said, already moving toward his room. "Killed 2 of his hands and made off with about 50 head. The sheriff's putting together a posse to track them." Teresa followed him down the hall. "You are going after them?" "I have to." Vincent emerged from his room with his gun, belt, and rifle. "McPherson's a friend, and rustlers are everyone's problem. They hit him today, they could hit me tomorrow." Fear spiked through her. "It is dangerous. That's why I'm taking the rifle." He checked the chamber, then looked at her. "I'll leave Samuel and James here. They'll keep watch on the place while we're gone. You'll be safe." "I am not worried about me," Teresa said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I am worried about you." Vincent went still. They stood in the hallway, close enough that Teresa could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could count the days of stubble on his jaw. Something passed between them, a current that made her breath catch and her heart hammer against her ribs. "I'll be careful," Vincent said quietly. "I promise." He left with Robert, Thomas, and Henry, riding out in a cloud of dust that hung in the air long after they disappeared over the horizon. Teresa watched from the porch, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, and tried to ignore the fear that had wrapped around her heart like a fist. The next 3 days were the longest of her life. She cooked and cleaned and tried to keep busy, but her mind kept drifting to Vincent and the other men, wondering where they were, if they were safe, if they had caught the rustlers. Samuel tried to reassure her, but even he was worried. Cattle rustlers were desperate men, and desperate men were dangerous. Vincent rode back on the 4th day, alive and whole but exhausted. Teresa was hanging laundry when she saw him coming up the road, and she dropped the shirt she was holding and ran to meet him. He dismounted slowly, moving like every muscle hurt, and she had to stop herself from throwing her arms around him. "You are all right?" she asked, searching his face for injuries. "Tired and sore, but all right." Vincent handed his reins to James. "We caught them about 30 miles south near the Arkansas River. Sheriff has them in custody now." "And the others?" "Robert took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll be fine. Thomas and Henry are good." Vincent looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You worried about me?" "Of course I worried," Teresa said. "You could have been killed." "But I was not." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell horse and sweat and leather. "I kept my promise. I was careful." Teresa looked up at him. This man who had won her in a card game and given her freedom, who treated her with respect and paid her wages and made her feel safe for the first time in years. This man who she had been trying so hard not to fall in love with, because he was her employer, and she was working off a debt, and it was complicated and wrong and impossible. Except she had fallen anyway, somewhere between the biscuits and the riding lessons, and the way he always made sure she ate enough at dinner. She had fallen in love with Vincent Bartlett, and the realization hit her like a lightning strike, sudden and illuminating and terrifying. "I am glad you are safe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent lifted his hand, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, rough and warm. "Teresa." "Mr. Bartlett," Samuel's voice shattered the moment. "We need you at the barn. One of the mares is colicking." Vincent dropped his hand and stepped back, but his eyes stayed on her for a long moment before he turned away. "Coming, Samuel." He left her standing in the yard, her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. She pressed her hand to her cheek where he had touched her and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had she imagined the look in his eyes, the way his voice had softened when he said her name? Or was she seeing what she wanted to see, reading romance into simple kindness? That night at dinner, Vincent was quieter than usual. He sat at the head of the table, pushing food around his plate, and Teresa caught him watching her 3 times with that same unreadable expression. The ranch hands talked around them, swapping stories about the posse and the chase, but Teresa barely heard them. All her attention was focused on Vincent, on the tension that hummed between them like a plucked string. After the meal, she was washing dishes when he came into the kitchen. The ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, and the house was quiet except for the splash of water and the clink of plates. Vincent leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest. "I need to talk to you," he said. Teresa's heart jumped into her throat. She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "All right. These past 2 months having you here, it's been..." He paused, searching for words. "It's been good. The house feels like a home instead of just a place to sleep. The men are happier, I am happier, and it is all because of you." "I am just doing my job," Teresa said carefully. "No, it is more than that." Vincent pushed away from the counter and took a step toward her. "You are more than that, and I need to know if I am imagining things or if you feel it too." Teresa's mouth went dry. "Feel what?" "This." He gestured between them, frustrated. This thing that happens every time we are in the same room, the way I cannot stop thinking about you even when I should be focused on work, the way you look at me sometimes like. He trailed off, shaking his head. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am seeing what I want to see because I have been alone for too long and you are the first good thing that has happened to me in years. You are not wrong, Teresa said, the words tumbling out in a rush. You are not imagining it, I feel it too. Vincent went still. You do. I have been trying not to, she admitted. You are my employer. I am working off a debt. It is complicated and probably wrong, and I should not want what I want, but I cannot help it. When you rode out with that posse, I was terrified something would happen to you. And when you came back safe, all I wanted to do was, she stopped, embarrassed. Was what? Vincent took another step closer. Was kiss you, Teresa whispered. The words hung in the air between them. Vincent stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to something hotter, something that made her knees weak. He crossed the remaining distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands. Can I? He asked, his voice rough. Can I kiss you? Yes, Teresa breathed. He kissed her like he was dying of thirst, and she was water, deep and hungry and desperate. Teresa melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her whole body lighting up like she had been struck by lightning. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with a skill that made her dizzy. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I have wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you, Vincent said, his forehead resting against hers. Standing in that saloon, looking so brave and so scared. I wanted to take you away from there, protect you, give you everything you deserved. You did give me everything, Teresa said. You gave me freedom and a job and respect. You gave me a home. I want to give you more. He pulled back just enough to look at her. I know it has only been 2 months. I know we should wait, take things slow, but I do not want to wait. I want you here not as an employee, but as my wife. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Is that too much too fast? Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. It is exactly enough, exactly fast enough. Yes, Vincent, yes to all of it. He kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter. When they broke apart, he kept his arms around her, holding her close like he was afraid she might disappear. Your father's debt is forgiven, he said. You do not owe me anything. If you marry me, it is because you want to, not because you have to. I want to, Teresa said firmly. I love you, Vincent Bartlett. I think I have loved you since you told me I was free to go or stay. I love you too. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. When do you want to get married? As soon as possible. Tomorrow if we can. Tomorrow might be pushing it, but how about next week? We can ride into Wilson, talk to the preacher, make it official. Teresa thought about going back to Wilson, about the possibility of seeing her father again, and her smile faded. Vincent saw the change and frowned. What is wrong, my father? She said quietly. He is still in Wilson. I do not want to see him. Then we will not, Vincent said simply. We can get married at the ranch. I will bring the preacher here. Your father does not need to know, and even if he found out, he has no claim on you anymore. You are free, Teresa. Completely free. She kissed him for that, for understanding without her having to explain, for protecting her even from her own past. They stood in the kitchen for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, planning their future in whispered words and stolen kisses. The wedding happened the following Sunday. The preacher rode out from Wilson, a cheerful man who asked no questions about the speed of the courtship. Teresa wore her mother's best dress, altered to fit her, and Vincent wore a new shirt that she had sewn for him in secret during the week. The ranch hands served as witnesses, grinning from ear to ear, and Samuel gave her away with tears in his eyes. It was a simple ceremony, held in the front yard with the prairie stretching out around them and the autumn sun warm on their faces. Vincent slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and when the preacher said he could kiss his bride, he did so with a gentleness that made Teresa's heart overflow. That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Vincent made love to her with the same gentleness, taking his time, showing her with his hands and mouth and body just how much he loved her. Teresa had been afraid, not knowing what to expect, but Vincent was patient and careful and so tender that she found herself crying from the sheer beauty of it. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy I cannot find words for it," Teresa said. "How is this my life? 2 months ago I was watching my father gamble me away in a saloon. Now I am married to the best man I have ever known." "I am not that good," Vincent said, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "You are. You gave me a choice when you did not have to. You treated me with respect when you could have done anything. You forgave a debt that was not even mine to begin with. If that is not good, I do not know what is." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something." "About that night in the saloon." Teresa propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "What about it?" "I lied when I said I did not make a habit of winning people in card games. The truth is, I had never played your father before that night. But I had heard about him, heard he was cheating other men and getting away with it, so I went looking for him." "You set him up?" Teresa asked slowly. "Not exactly. I sat down at his table and played fair. When he started cheating, I cheated better, and when he bet you—" Vincent's jaw tightened. "I could have folded, could have walked away, but I knew what kind of man he was, and I could not stand the thought of him selling you to someone else, someone who might hurt you, so I won." Teresa stared at him, trying to process this. "You saved me on purpose." "I wanted to help," Vincent said. "Maybe that was arrogant, thinking I knew better than you what you needed, but I could not walk away and leave you in that situation." She kissed him, deep and thorough. "That is not arrogant, that is heroic. You saw someone in trouble and you helped them, even though you did not know me, even though I was nothing to you." "You were never nothing," Vincent said fiercely. "From the moment I saw you, you were everything." They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies with careful attention. And when Teresa finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she did so with a smile on her face and hope in her heart for the first time in years. The winter came early that year, sweeping down from the north with ice and snow that turned the prairie into a white wilderness. Teresa and Vincent spent the long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. She told him about her mother, who had been kind and strong, and about her childhood before her father had turned to drink. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about coming to Kansas to make his own way, about the loneliness of building something alone. "Not alone anymore," Teresa said, curled against his side. "No," Vincent agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Not alone anymore." The ranch hands adapted quickly to having Teresa as their boss's wife instead of their cook, though she still insisted on making meals for everyone. It gave her pleasure to feed the men who had become her friends, to see them happy and well cared for. Samuel took to calling her daughter, and James still brought her wildflowers when he could find them under the snow. In January, Teresa realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, the way her body was changing, the nausea that struck in the mornings, but she waited until she was sure before telling Vincent. She found him in the barn, mending a saddle, and stood in the doorway trying to figure out how to say it. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Hey, what brings you out here? Is it too cold?" "I need to tell you something," Teresa said, nerves making her voice shake. Vincent put down the saddle immediately and crossed to her. "What is wrong? Are you sick?" in a manner of speaking. She took his hands and placed them on her stomach. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Vincent's eyes went wide. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am sure." A slow smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like a fool. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, and Teresa laughed and held on tight. "We are having a baby," Vincent said when he finally set her down. "You and me, we are having a baby." "Are you happy?" Teresa asked, though the answer was written all over his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He kissed her soundly. "You have made me the luckiest man alive, Teresa Bartlett." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Teresa bloomed with health, her body rounding out as the baby grew. Vincent hovered like a mother hen, constantly worried about her working too hard or lifting too much, until she had to shoo him away with a wooden spoon and a laugh. The ranch hands were excited too, already planning to teach the baby to ride and rope as soon as it was old enough. Spring came with a rush of green across the prairie, wildflowers blooming in carpets of color that stretched to the horizon. Teresa spent her afternoons in the rocking chair on the porch, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, feeling the baby kick and turn inside her. Vincent would sit beside her when his work was done, his hand on her belly, talking to the baby about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. "What if it is a girl?" Teresa asked one evening. "Then I will teach her to ride and rope just like I would a boy," Vincent said. "Any child of yours is going to be smart and strong and capable, no matter what. What if she wants to wear dresses and learn to sew? Then we will get her the prettiest dresses and the best fabric, and I will learn to sew right alongside her." Vincent kissed her temple. "I just want our child to be happy and healthy. Boy or girl does not matter to me." Teresa leaned into him, content. This was the life she had dreamed of as a girl, before her mother died and her father fell apart. A good man who loved her, a home of her own, a baby on the way. It felt like a miracle, like something she had not earned but been given anyway by a generous God. The baby came in late August, almost exactly a year after that fateful night in the saloon. Teresa's labor started just before dawn, and by the time the sun was high in the sky, Vincent was pacing the front yard like a caged animal while the midwife from Wilson tended to Teresa inside. The ranch hands tried to distract him with work, but he could not focus on anything except the sounds coming from the bedroom. When the baby's first cry split the air, Vincent nearly fell over with relief. The midwife emerged an hour later with a smile on her face. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Bartlett. Mother and baby are both doing well." Vincent did not wait to hear more. He burst into the bedroom and stopped short at the sight of Teresa propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked exhausted and radiant and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Come meet your son," Teresa said softly. Vincent approached the bed like he was in church, reverent and awed. The baby was red-faced and squalling, his tiny fists waving in the air. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that might turn gray like his father's or brown like his mother's, impossible to tell yet. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby immediately gripped it, his whole fist wrapped around Vincent's finger. "You are perfect. What should we name him?" Teresa asked. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth between family names and new ones. But looking at his son, Vincent knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "After my grandfather, Thomas Patrick Bartlett." Teresa went still. "Patrick, after my father, after the man he could have been," Vincent said gently. "Not the man he was. Your son deserves to carry a name with hope in it, not bitterness." Tears spilled down Teresa's cheeks. "You are too good to me." "Impossible," Vincent said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." Thomas Patrick Bartlett was a happy baby, easy and content unless he was hungry. Teresa recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to running the household with baby Thomas strapped to her back or napping in a basket in the kitchen. The ranch hands were besotted with the boy, taking turns holding him and making silly faces to get him to smile. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier but richer than before. Teresa had never been happier. She had a husband who loved her, a son who was healthy and growing, and a home that felt truly hers. When she looked back at the terrified girl standing in that saloon, watching her father gamble her life away, she almost could not believe it was the same person. One afternoon in October, when Thomas was just over a year old, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Teresa was hanging laundry while the baby played at her feet, and she looked up to see a man on horseback, thin and ragged, with the look of someone who had been traveling hard. Something about him was familiar, and as he got closer, her stomach dropped. It was her father. Patrick O'Malley dismounted slowly, like every movement hurt. He had aged 10 years in the two since she had seen him, his face gaunt and his hands shaking. He took off his hat when he saw her and stood there, uncertain. "Teresa," he said, his voice hoarse, "I did not think I would find you here." Vincent emerged from the barn, his hand automatically going to his gun belt when he saw the stranger. Then he recognized Patrick, and his expression went hard and cold. He crossed the yard in quick strides and put himself between Teresa and her father. "You are not welcome here," Vincent said flatly. "I know." Patrick looked past Vincent to Teresa. "I just wanted to see her, to apologize. I have been sober for 6 months now, and I am trying to make amends for what I did." 6 months, Vincent said with contempt. "You think 6 months erases what you did? You gambled away your daughter like she was property." "I know," Patrick said again, his voice breaking. "I know what I did. I have to live with it every day, but I needed to tell her I am sorry. I needed her to know that I am trying to be better." Teresa picked up Thomas and held him close. The baby grabbed a fistful of her dress, sensing her tension. She looked at her father, this man who had given her life, and then tried to throw it away and felt nothing but pity. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "More than I thought it was possible to hurt. You took everything my mother built, everything she believed in, and you destroyed it for whiskey and cards." "I know," Patrick whispered, "but I am not going to carry that pain around anymore," Teresa continued. "I have a good life now. A husband who loves me, a son who is healthy, a home that is mine. And you do not get to take any of that away from me, not even with your apologies." Patrick flinched like she had struck him. "I understand. I will go." "Wait." Teresa handed Thomas to Vincent and took a few steps toward her father. "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do not want to spend the rest of my life angry. You are sick, and maybe you are getting better, and I hope you do. But I do not want you in my life. I do not want to see you again. Do you understand?" Patrick nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I understand. Thank you, Teresa, for forgiving me. I do not deserve it, but thank you." He mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing down the road without looking back. Teresa watched him go, Vincent's free arm around her shoulders, and felt the last piece of her old life break away and scatter on the wind. "You all right?" Vincent asked. "I am good," Teresa said, and she meant it. "I am finally free of him, of all of it." They went back inside, the three of them, and shut the door on the past. The years rolled on, each one building on the last. Teresa and Vincent had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy, and the ranch house echoed with laughter and noise. Thomas grew up strong and kind, learning to ride before he could walk properly, and his siblings followed him everywhere like ducklings. The ranch prospered under Vincent's management. He built a reputation for honesty and fair dealing, and people came from all over Kansas to buy his horses. Teresa expanded the kitchen garden into a proper vegetable farm, selling produce in Wilson and to the other ranches in the area. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Samuel passed away when Thomas was 10, dying peacefully in his sleep after a long life well lived. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a marker that read, "Beloved Friend." James took over as foreman, and he proved to be as capable as Samuel had been. He eventually married a girl from Wilson and built a house on the edge of the ranch property, staying close to the family that had taken him in as a boy. Teresa never heard from her father again. She did not know if he had stayed sober or fallen back into his old ways, did not know if he was alive or dead. She thought about him sometimes, in a distant way, the same way she might think about a stranger whose story she had heard once. He was part of her past, but he had no place in her present or future. On their 10th anniversary, Vincent gave her a new ring to go with her wedding band, a sapphire that matched her eyes. They stood on the porch where they had been married, watching their children play in the yard, and Vincent pulled her close. "You ever regret it?" he asked, "staying with me instead of leaving that night?" Teresa looked up at him, this man who had given her everything, who had seen her at her lowest and offered her a choice that changed her life. "Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Vincent Bartlett." "You are my everything," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and the children, this life we built. I wake up every morning grateful that your father sat down at that card table." Teresa laughed. "That is probably the only time in history anyone has been grateful for Patrick O'Malley's gambling." "Probably," Vincent agreed, grinning. He kissed her, deep and sweet, and Teresa melted into him the same way she had that first time in the kitchen, all those years ago. Their children grew up and had children of their own. Thomas took over the ranch when Vincent started slowing down, running it with the same honesty and integrity his father had taught him. The daughters married good men and settled nearby, filling the house with grandchildren every Sunday for dinner. Vincent and Teresa grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing, but their love never dimming. On a warm spring evening when Teresa was 65 and Vincent was 70, they sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and pink. The ranch was quiet, the work done for the day, and in the distance they could hear their grandchildren playing. "I have been thinking," Teresa said. "That is usually dangerous," Vincent teased. She swatted his arm gently. "Hush! I have been thinking about that night in the saloon. About how terrified I was, how certain my life was over, and look at us now. Look at everything we built." "We built a good life," Vincent agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed." "You gave me a choice," Teresa said, "when you did not have to. You told me I was free to go or stay, and I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to. That choice was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." Vincent lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You gave me a gift, too. You gave me love and family and a reason to get up every morning. You made my house a home." "I love you," Teresa said. "I have loved you for 43 years, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Vincent said, "always and forever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon and the stars emerge one by one. The prairie stretched out around them, endless and beautiful, the same land they had worked and loved and built a life on. And as the night settled in, Teresa thought about the girl she had been, standing in that saloon with fear in her heart and no hope for the future. That girl could never have imagined this. Could never have believed that the worst night of her life would lead to the best years, that the man who won her in a card game would become the love of her life, that freedom and choice and respect would be the foundation of a marriage that lasted decades. But it was true. All of it was true. And as Teresa Bartlett sat on her porch with her husband's hand in hers and her family all around her, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Vincent passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 78, with Teresa holding his hand, and their children gathered around his bed. They buried him on the hill next to Samuel, with a marker that read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend." Teresa grieved deeply, but without regret, knowing that they had loved each other well and completely for every day they had together. She lived another 5 years after Vincent, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about the ranch and the old days and the cowboy who had won her in a card game and set her free. She made sure they understood that freedom was the greatest gift, that choice mattered, that love was something you built day by day with small kindnesses and big sacrifices. When Teresa died at the age of 83, they buried her next to Vincent on the hill overlooking the ranch. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and they told stories about her strength and her kindness, and the way she had turned a terrible situation into a beautiful life. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each one learning the lessons that Vincent and Teresa had taught. Work hard. Treat people with respect. Give others the same chances you hope to receive. Love deeply and without reservation. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the prairie, you can almost hear them there on the hill, Vincent and Teresa, still talking and laughing and holding hands as the sun sets on another day in the Wild West they called home. The story of the girl who was lost in a card game and the cowboy who set her free became a legend in Wilson, Kansas, passed down from generation to generation. People told it as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there could be light. That one act of kindness could change everything. That love could bloom in the most unlikely places, and every time someone told the story, they ended it the same way. With a cowboy who looked at a frightened girl and said 5 words that would echo through the years. "You are free to go or stay." She chose to stay. And in staying, she found everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. A home, a family, a love that lasted a lifetime. All because one man decided that people were not property, that freedom mattered, that the right thing to do was always worth doing even when it was hard. That was the legacy Vincent and Teresa left behind. Not just the ranch or the land or the family, but the lesson that kindness and respect and love could build something stronger than any debt, more valuable than any amount of gold, more enduring than the prairie itself. And so their story lived on, told and retold, a testament to the power of choice and the beauty of a love that began with 5 simple words and lasted forever. The children who heard it grew up believing in second chances and fresh starts. They learned that your past did not have to define your future, that one moment of courage could change everything, that love was always worth fighting for. The ranch prospered for over 100 years, each generation adding to what Vincent and Teresa had started. The house was expanded and modernized, but they kept the original bedroom where Teresa had slept that first night, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Couples who were struggling would come and stand in that room, touching the walls and the furniture, drawing strength from the story of 2 people who had built something beautiful out of something terrible. And sometimes, On quiet evenings when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch, someone would tell the story again. About the card game and the choice and the love that followed. About Vincent Bartlett, who won a woman and gave her freedom. About Teresa O'Malley, who chose to stay and built a life beyond her wildest dreams. They would end the story with the sunset and the rocking chairs and two old people who loved each other until the very end. And then they would look at each other, these descendants who carried Vincent and Teresa's blood and their legacy, and they would understand what really mattered, not money or property or winning or losing, but love, respect, freedom, choice. These were the things that built a life worth living. These were the things that lasted. And so the story of Teresa and Vincent lived on, a light in the darkness, a hope for the hopeless, a reminder that even in the wild and untamed West, where justice was often swift and cruel, there were still good people doing good things. There were still cowboys who would give a frightened girl a choice. There were still women brave enough to stay and build something beautiful. Their love story became more than just a story. It became a promise that good things could come from bad situations, that kindness mattered, that love was always possible even in impossible circumstances. It became a foundation that dozens of marriages were built on, a standard that generations aspired to, a legacy that would never fade. And on that hill overlooking the ranch, where Vincent and Teresa rested side by side under the big Kansas sky, the wind whispered through the grass and carried their story across the prairie, across the years, across the generations. A story of love and freedom and the power of a single choice. A story that would never be forgotten.